to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is William Vanderbloemen, author of the book of Be the Unicorn, 12 Data-Driven Habits that Separate the Best Leaders from the Rest. William, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. It's great to be with you. And I know you're up at all hours just to get this going. So thanks for doing what you do all day.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. So, William, let's start off with you giving us a little bit about your professional background.
Okay. Well, I'll try and keep it short. I probably growing up was a chronic entrepreneur. I think it's a condition. I'm not sure it can be cured. From here in the States, when I was growing up, the newspaper, which if you're in Gen Z or Gen A, that's a thing that was printed that would have the news for the day, and you had to wait till the whole next day to get another news cycle. But the newspaper was delivered by boys and girls on bicycles, and I was one of those. And I was the newspaper boy that figured out my route was very inefficient, so I bought out the routes around me and redistributed the lines and sold off the pieces I didn't want and kept the parts I wanted. And so it's just a chronic, probably congenital condition of entrepreneurialism. If you fast forward past college, Wake Forest undergrad, and then Princeton for a seminary, I went into church ministry, which is a long, different podcast, but went into ministry and was going to try and help people. I'd had a real turnaround in my life and wanted to let other people know about that as well. And went into church work, which is not always the best environment for a serial entrepreneur. Churches are what is the old sociology line, Mark? I think the number one function of established organizations is to resist rapid change. I think I remember that from Sociology 101. So putting me in established environments was probably not the smartest thing, but we had a lot of fun and did a lot of great things. And long story short, I came to a place where it was time to go do something different, went into business. And while I was at a rather large oil and gas company here in the States, it would have been one of the 200 largest companies on the Fortune 200. And I was in the HR department. They were teaching me the business. So do a year here, a year there, management rotation kind of thing. And the CEO said, I think I need to step aside. We need to find my successor. So he'd been there 9.5 years, done a great job. And they hired this thing called a search firm. I'd never heard of an executive search firm, but it was a group that came in. And since I was HR, I got to be kind of on the team. I wasn't much of an essential player of the team, but I got to see what was going on. 90 days later, they had their new CEO. Now, in the church world, where I'd spent my professional life, I was pastor of a very large church in Texas, in Houston, Texas, actually where Sam Houston went to church. And they took 3 years to find me and thought that was normal. I was there 6 years. They took 3 more years to find the next person. So there's a 12-year span, half looking for a senior leader, half with a senior leader. And here I am at this oil and gas company, and they've had a guy 9.5 years, and 90 days later, they've got their next guy. And turns out he stayed 10 years. And I thought, this is crazy. Why can't the church have the same elegant solution for leadership transition that the business world had? So Adrian and I had just gotten married, my wife and I. We'd blended our families. We have 6 kids at the time. We have 7 now. And I came home and said to her, I think I need to quit my job and start something new for churches. And she looked at me and said, oh, that's because churches love new ideas, right? And so you can tell she's the smart one of the two of us. Questionable taste in men, but smart nonetheless. And Mark, that happened in the fall of 2008, which, if you
Perfect
remember,
timing.
oh, it's just a beautiful time to quit a stable job and start some new idea for churches. What a fool. I mean, couldn't have been a dumber time to do that. But fortune smiled, and here we are, I guess, almost 17 years later, and we've completed 3,500 searches. We work with churches all over the world, really, mainly in the U.S. and mainly English speaking. But if you say English speaking, then it's anywhere. Sometimes a little Mandarin, sometimes Spanish, but we've expanded that past churches to faith-based schools, to large nonprofits, relief organizations, that sort of thing, and even sort of values-based businesses, maybe like a family-owned, privately held business that has a set of cultural values that they've built their company around, and they're just as interested in that as they are job competency. So it's been a really fun ride, and we've grown every year except 2020. And then during 2020, we had all of our clients closed. That will change your P&L for the year, I learned.
Yeah.
Um, but during that time, it gave us some time to step back and to say, well, what have we learned as we've done this for so many years? What research have we gathered? We've kept incredibly detailed records. And that led us to start asking questions about who are the best we've ever interviewed, and could we identify who they are? And could we ask the question, do they have anything in common? And that research project was frankly just kind of a selfish research project so I could identify talent faster and be better at our job. But what happened turned into a book because we realized the commonalities among these unicorns, as we call them, were not something that they were born with. It was not good fortune. It was just solid habits they practiced. And when we realized it was habits that could be practiced and learned, we're like, well, this isn't for us anymore. This is a book we need to put in people's hands so they can stand out in the crowd and be the top 1% and so forth. So longer answer than you wanted, but I guess if you ask a recovering preacher a question, you get a long answer.
So before we get into the book, is your company mission driven in terms of the kind of clients that you take on, that you're looking for people that have a higher purpose and mission, both
100%.
with the
100%.
organizations?
Yes. Yes, I'm
How do you
convinced.
evaluate them?
Well, I'm learning as I go. It's a tightrope, right? We try and say we believe you can do good while doing good business. And that's the tightrope, isn't it? Sometimes the business decision might not be the one that matches values, and sometimes the values decision, you could probably make more money if you did it differently. Um, but we are privately held. My wife and I are the sole owners. We have no debt, so we have the latitude to make some decisions. And we've messed some things up on the way, but we've learned some things too. And I think for us, what we've learned is not so much faith-based values, but we've defined what are the cultural values that have really worked over the years when we function well as a team. And we try pretty carefully to hire around those cultural values. So it's not like a discrimination based on religion or anything. It's just do you function like this or not? And we've got 9 values that we outlined and a little matrix. That's a whole nother book we wrote called Culture Wins. We studied 150 companies that were doing things this way to see what are the commonalities. But, Mark, at the end of the day, I have a religion and philosophy degree on the wall. And most people that graduate with a philosophy degree spend their whole career saying, would you like fries with that?
So let's jump into the book. Embracing Speed and Handling Fear. You elaborate on how fear can often paralyze decision making and hinder fast responses. What practical strategies do you recommend for individuals to overcome these fears and embrace a faster decision making process in high pressure situations, which also, right, happens in very large organizations when they stop being entrepreneurial and people are more worried about preserving their job and their status than they do about taking the organization to the next level.
Yeah, well, there are two. So back up just a bit and give a little background for the framework of the book, if you don't mind. We
Yeah, of
studied,
course.
we identified our top talent that we've ever interviewed, and that's based on how they interviewed, how they performed, if they've gotten promoted, if they just proven to be an all-star. And of the hundreds of thousands of people we've interviewed, the top 30,000 was our sample set. And so we started to say, well, what do they have in common? We spent a long time researching that, and we found 12 habits that they practice, not 12 traits. And they were actually really surprising. I kind of thought, it would be everybody over 6 feet tall with good hair and beautiful teeth, or people with a pedigree or went to a school like where you teach, where people score amazing grades, or people that were well connected or did a good job of being born, if you know what I mean. It wasn't any of that.
Yeah.
It was 12 habits that were the common denominator among the 12 was it all related to how these unicorns treated other humans. So each of those 12 habits becomes a chapter of the book. And the very first one you're hitting on is unicorns are fast. They get back to people quickly. They get back to people intentionally. And nearly everyone else does not. So we can go more into the speed thing, but I think what what I've seen in unicorns in their response time and speed is an ability to discern when is speed necessary and when it's not. And it reminds me of a story when I was first thinking going into search. I had no idea what that meant. And I talked to a friend of mine who is one of the best in the world. He's in the energy sector. Go figure. I'm in Houston, so energy. And I said, Bruce, I don't know if I'll be any good at this. He said, tell you what, and this is 2008, so there are no iPhones. They'd just come out, maybe. Um, he said, imagine you're on a ski trip, just you and your daughter, one-on-one time, and you're on the ski lift and you're having a fabulous talk and your phone rings. What do you do? And he said, do you answer it? And I said, it depends on who it is. And he said, you're going to do fine. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, first of all, you had your phone with you. And that's before phones had become an appendage of our body like they are now. This was back when it was flip phones. You might leave them off. And he said, and secondly, you look to see who it was. So unicorns are always ready to act, always ready to respond. They show tremendous responsiveness. The speed is one of the chapters. Agility is another chapter. Bias for action is another chapter. They're always ready to go, but they're discerning. What does that actually mean? If I responded to every email within 60 seconds, I wouldn't do anything else all day. I'd probably get 500 emails a day. So the trick, I think, the prayer, if you will, if you're gonna try and hone a skill, is the wisdom to know when to act and when not to. And I don't know how to teach that. It's interesting that a lot of people will tell you, Musk is the richest guy in the world by a big factor now, right?
Right.
But if I read an article in Forbes not too long ago that said Musk is nowhere near the richest guy ever. And the richest guy ever was King Solomon. And this is like Forbes doesn't have a religious, angle to play. They're just like, he had more stuff than anybody ever has. And if you look at the Hebrew scriptures, the very first thing he asks when he takes the throne is, oh gosh, I need wisdom. And God responds and says, you've asked for the most precious thing there is. And because that's what you asked for, you're going to have more than anybody's ever had. Now, take the religion out of it. I really believe the discernment and the wisdom to know the difference between what has to be dealt with right away and what doesn't is what separates the best from the rest. And I guess that means for everybody listening, wherever your job is, whatever you're doing, maybe you own a company, what are the highest goals? What are the things that must get done? And what are the things that don't necessarily have to get done? And how can you tell the difference? I've had this happen, and I've had successes and failures with making decisions quickly. And when it's right, it's really, really good. And when it's wrong, I try and learn from it and get better.
I heard Elon Musk's wife was interviewed maybe 8 years ago in Forbes, and she said, what was the thing you learned most from him? And it's the same thing that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and many uber successful people say, and that is no, the word no.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing that you could possibly learn to master is the word no. And did you find that when you were researching, when you've been interviewing folks about them not taking on unnecessary tasks, taking on too much, but knowing how to manage their time well?
Well, you've asked a lot of good questions in that one sentence. The two or three that came to my mind, and I'm an external processor, so forgive the ramble. But first of all, let's talk about time. Unicorns are there's a whole chapter where we do case studies and we interview them and we about getting things done. Okay,
Yep.
so massive study that I read uh, not too long ago about people who were born in the U.S. with a decent life, but certainly not a wealthy life, not a life of privilege, right? Maybe some of them were born with nothing or less than nothing. And every one of the people they studied had built themselves into 8 figures of net worth. So in the US, that'd be $10 million net worth or more, which is a really comfortable life, right? And they were looking for what do they have in common. And the one biggest thing they found that those people who were able to build something on their own and break through barriers was that they were relentlessly asking themselves, is this worth my time? Like, you won't catch those people scrolling on their phone or bemoaning the death of TikTok. It's just not going to happen because they're constantly. My wife is the best at this, far better than I am. Auditing, is this worth our time? Is this worth our time? She doesn't even want to go to a movie because that's 2 hours of going on some emotional journey that's been predetermined and prescribed. And let's use our time differently. So I think unicorns are able. I noticed in one of the questions you sent over earlier, there's a great line. Uh, Distractions are often opportunities in disguise, and opportunities are often distractions in disguise. And being able to tell what's the most important and what's not, some of that's through a rubric of what's the goal I'm trying to get done. And if this doesn't help the goal, I'm not going to do it. Another piece of it is just having the wisdom and intuition to make a crazy decision that's the right bet. A mentor of mine, a guy named John Maxwell, who's written a lot of leadership books.
Yeah. Yes. Know who he is. Yes.
John told me, I called him when I was thinking of starting our company and asked him what he thought. And he said, a line I'll never forget. He said, William, profit hinges on one thing: risk. Take a little risk, you get a little profit. Take a lot of risk, you get a lot of profit. And it's just where can you calculate the maximum amount of risk you can take without ruining your life? And I think that goes back to how people spend their time. Am I risking with my time? Am I risking with an opportunity? And I think the unicorns are the ones who constantly realize. I mean, Buffett says this all the time now. I don't need any more money. I don't even want any more money. What I want is more time, and I can't get it. And so I see the unicorns constantly auditing, is this worth my time or not? And I think it's a great question to take home from the podcast and just ask yourself as you go through the day, is this worth my time or not? Of course, having goals, daily goals, will help you discern what's worth your time or not. But then also having an intuitive gut that says this might not make sense on paper, but I can feel in my bones it's the right decision, and being willing to risk that. Well, that's that profit hinges on risk. So it's not live like a robot, but it's not live like just a passionate fly by your seat of your pants.
I'm going weighing one of those things now for one of the things I've been involved in for almost a couple decades. Is it really worth the time, or maybe it's now time to turn it over to somebody else? So yeah, I'm
Well,
going through that
you
myself.
get to it in business with even down to data reports. Like the world is like big data. We want to see the data. Is this work? So we're going to run reports. We're going to run a study. At some point, you can overstudy. At some point, there's no
Hear that?
ROI.
Yeah, and you hear that from people who've built big organizations that say people start to become too reliant on data and not use it as just one part of the information that they're evaluating. Distinguishing between distractions and opportunities that you were talking about, you provide a chart to help differentiate distractions from opportunities. Can you share a personal experience where applying the method significantly impacted your decision making or led
Yeah.
to a successful outcome?
Yeah, well, I can tell you a lot that did not result in a successful outcome, but one that comes to mind when I first started learning search. Before we started the company, I worked for a small search firm, and I say worked for them, but it was just if you find something, we'll pay you part of the fees. Great people. Love the guy who founded it. He taught me a lot of things. but I had no budget. I had no marketing budget. And I was trying to break into churches, which are not real friendly to new ideas, with this brand new idea. I had been a pastor of a fairly large church at a very young age, 31 years old, when I went to First Presbyterian Houston, which sounds old in the corporate world, but the church moves at a different pace. So I knew most of the pastors of the larger churches in the country. Uh, we had been talking about buying a sponsorship at a conference, like, buy a vendor booth. We've all seen them. And then
Yeah, yeah, of
you get
course.
some form of chocolate so people will stop by, or whatever the thing is, so whatever the, trade junk is of the day, whistles, flashlights, whatever. And that was going to be a big investment. I mean, it was going to be like $10,000. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out what good is that going to do for getting the word out, because we were a new idea. And then a friend of mine called me and he said, "Hey, there are four big conferences in the church world." I said, "Yes, I know the four." He said, and he designed. He's an architect, and he designed buildings for a lot of churches. And he said, I've talked to guys that run all four of these into letting me. I have to find three partners to fund it, but letting me build the green room for the speakers. So there's no green room. I mean, it's just that churches have, frankly, pretty bad green room. There's not even a green room. So he's like, I can build a really cool experience for them, but I'm going to need $40,000 a conference. Well, I had no money. And so if you can put in $160,000, you'll be one of four sponsors. You'll have nobody can get in the green room except the speakers and the four of us. And I said, done. And I didn't even have the money. Just done. I'll figure out the money. I called my boss and said, "Can we fund that?" And he said, "Well, you can pull it out of your fees that you earn, but I don't have money to do." So I had to figure out how to put the money together. But the difference between being in the room with the right 20 people versus being in a hallway with 20,000, oh my gosh, paid night and day. I mean, I can't tell you how much it. Seth Godin talks about find the sneezers. I don't know if Seth is a name you know, but the marketer Seth Godin.
Yes, of
You
course.
don't want to go
Yeah,
reach the
sure.
masses. You want to reach five people who know the masses and let them. He calls it sneezing. Where particles go everywhere at 100 miles an hour, and that's exactly what happened. We got in the room with them. We spent a year at these conferences. We did it the next year. We'd done a few good pieces of work, and all of a sudden everybody was talking about it. And out the chute, we came much faster than I ever thought. It was a completely irrational decision, but I knew in my gut, put me in that room with those few people and it'll be worth the money. And we took the risk and it worked. There have been plenty of times where it's not worked, but that one, we hit the right number.
In chapter two, can you elaborate on how you personally navigate the balance between being authentic? And that comes up every time I talk to people about leadership and management and all those things, and maintaining necessary boundaries, especially in professional settings. How do you determine what to share?
That is such a good question. That is so good. And here in the States, it's particularly tender. You have a couple dynamics that are driving a very different workforce than ever. And we could spend hours talking about it, but the reality that I see, what I'm taking in, is people coming out of college are waiting longer to get married. They're waiting even longer to have kids, and that you can say that's good or bad, but the reality is that man, my 31-year-old son, just got married, and they're not going to have kids for a while. When I was 31, I had three kids and was already at First Pres Houston. So it's just a different speed. There are all kinds of books. The Anxious Generation is a great book that explains the slow aging that's happening. But one of the byproducts of people waiting longer is they don't have a family to go home to at night. But people are not going to live without a family. So guess who is the family? The people in the workplace. I even hear young millennials, well, older millennials and Gen Z saying it's our family, our friends and family. So to be an effective leader in a workplace that sees the workplace as family, you've got to open up a little bit. But when you open up too much, it can be really bad. I mean, frankly, it can be illegal. It can be lawsuits. It can be risk. It can be all kinds of things. So where is the line? And I think what I'm trying to learn as I go is I need to get rid of any kind of polish, sheen, or lacquer that I'm putting onto any talk that I give to my team. And I grew up in the era where leaders, never let them see you sweat, always have it put together, have your points, make the talk tight, and it ends where it began, and it's all rhymes. I mean, it's almost all iambic pentameter. It's a beautiful, well-produced thing. That does not work in conveying authenticity. Unicorns conveyed authenticity, but I think what I'm learning is authenticity doesn't necessarily mean vulnerability. It doesn't mean sharing what's, oh, I think my marriage is in trouble. It doesn't mean sharing my kids on drugs. It doesn't mean sharing, I'm really afraid of what the future might be with AI. Those things may be true, but again, back to having wisdom to know where to share and where not. I think it's more authenticity, little changes in the way that you communicate. Instead of saying, here are the three things you need to do, say, you know, I'm asking myself three questions lately, and I'm trying to learn because I think the world's shifting. And what I'm seeing and what I'm learning and what I'm asking myself is these three things. So rather than giving a directive, you're asking questions. And a really cool hack for trying to get better at this that I'm trying to learn is an audit. Like at night, I'll sit down, not every night, and ask myself, did I give out more orders and directives, or did I ask more questions? Interestingly, um, the person who a lot of people in the world would say gave a lot of directives would be Jesus. But if you study the manuscripts, he asked way more questions. 330 questions is ridiculous. He would answer questions with a question. And that breeds some authenticity. Like, hey, I'm learning too. And I think if you can show a spirit of learning, well, that shows authenticity. The other thing that the easiest hack I know for authenticity right now is just to look somebody in the eye. I mean, these things are the giant distraction. I'm holding up a mobile phone if you're not watching, if you're listening. There's a great talk Simon Sinek gives.
I am.
Yeah, where he says, hey, somebody hand me your phone. Maybe you've seen this. And it says, now, do you think I'm paying attention to you while he's holding the phone? The answer is no. And there's studies done that show that if you have your phone out during a business dinner, even if it's face down on the table, you lose an interaction quotient that's pretty big. So we're in the age of the giant distraction. And if you can look people dead in the eye, it will breed authenticity. And here's what I mean. I don't know. You've probably been with somebody. I've had the pleasure and honor of being with a lot of world leaders over the years, and I sat with President Clinton for a long time, just the two of us.
That's the name I was thinking about just now, literally.
He is the master of this. You ever spend time with somebody and you say they made me feel like I was the only person in the room. That's authenticity. And that's not vulnerability. I mean, it's not wrong to be vulnerable. It's authentic. Well, how do you do that? You actually listen. Give people your undivided attention in a world of the great distraction, undivided attention. And I can lean into the time with President Clinton to make 2 points. One is he looked me dead in the eye. Here's a hack. Where do you look when you talk to somebody? Probably not in their eye. Well, yes, I do, William. I look at people when I talk to them. Which eye are you looking at? You can't look at both. You look at the bridge of their nose. Okay, biological fact, and this is not in the book. 90% of all humans are right eye dominant. Okay, so if you want to just guess, we only use one eye to see, the other's for peripheral vision. And we're only looking through one when we're talking. The other one is just there for depth. And when you look someone squarely in their right eye, you have a 9 in 10 chance. And if you're wrong, you'll notice it pretty quick because their eyes start shifting around. You can just shift to the left. But look them dead in the right eye when you talk to them and watch how much more they feel like you're paying attention. You will have to pay attention. You'll have to put the phone down. Looking people dead in the eye. The other thing that President Clinton did that really I'm not a fanboy at all. In fact, we didn't see eye to eye on a whole lot of things politically, but he made me feel like I was the only person in the room because he kept deflecting the conversation away from himself and back to me. Well, I'd ask him about himself. Say, "Oh, that brochure on your desk. You're leading a trip to Greece to the footsteps of Paul." like, well, yes, sir, Mr. President. Tell me about that. Oh, you need to know my friend that runs the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm like, oh, sure, Mr. President, I'll just Google his phone number and, well, dang it if he didn't connect me to the guy. And I could give you 5 different examples where he flipped the conversation from him to me and then asked me questions and then found ways to be helpful to me with the things I was doing. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I may not agree with this guy and everything, but he has just come off as really authentic to me.
That's exactly the person I was thinking of because everybody that I've met maybe a couple dozen people who have met President Clinton, and they all say exactly what you said, that
Well,
they felt they were the only person.
he's a Rain Man. I mean, an apocryphal story. I happen to know the person, so I know it's true. He was standing in the line, meeting people. This was, I guess, he'd been in office 6 or 7 years or something like that. And the person that I know was standing on the other side of the line, just watching. They go up the hill quite a bit, and a little old lady came through and said, "My name's whatever it is, Sally Mae, or what, and I'm
Yeah.
from Des Moines, and you won't remember me." And he said, "No, I remember you, and I owe you an apology." And she said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We met when I was campaigning the very first time I ran for president, and you told me that your husband had just died." And I said, "I'm so sorry. I know what you're going through." I didn't know what you're going through. "And my mother died last month. Now I know what you're going through. I'm so sorry." I'm like,
Oh, shit.
that's a masterclass.
Yeah. Well, and everybody knows him for that, and people will always say that make that comment about him. Um, in your opinion, how has the cultural shift toward valuing authenticity affected the perception of leadership? Are leaders who project a polished image still held in the same regard as those who emphasize authenticity? And some of them are trying to learn how to be authentic, which to me automatically rules them out as being authentic.
It is a bit of a chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the when I came into leadership in the 90s, as my kids would say, "You mean back in the 19s?" Like, yes, back in the 19s, 1990s. You were supposed to be strong. You were supposed to be polished. You were supposed to have a vision for 10 years from now. That's kind of blown out of the water. I don't know if you know an author here in the States named Brene Brown. She's become quite well known. She's a sociologist and teaches at University of Houston, actually a neighbor of mine, but she's really hit a nerve. And it's all about showing your weakness, showing your vulnerability, showing the things you're working through. And some of the things she writes are just lovely and beautiful and really helpful. Other things I don't know, maybe she knows more than I do, but I haven't quite gotten on board with. But the tide has definitely shifted toward leaders that are willing to say, I'm learning this. I need to learn more about that. And I don't think that means you pull up the dump truck and share all the junk in your life, but I do think it means showing that you don't have everything figured out. And as you're leading a team of people who are the first digital natives to ever come through the workforce, anybody who says they have it all figured out is going to get fact checked by Google or Chat GPT and proven to not have it all figured out. So I think leaders, that if you really want to move toward authenticity and away from, looking like you have it all together, just talk about what you're learning. Talk about a mistake you made when you were younger. That can go really viral among your team in a good way.
I find my students, when I tell them about all the mistakes I've made in business and what I've learned from it, or I ask them questions about, get their opinions on things. I just got their opinions on something I'm trying to do for the school. And that gives me more credibility than as if I made the decisions on my own without doing it or only told them the positive stories of success. When you hear about the failures, then it makes you more normal and approachable
Yeah.
to them. And there's so
Well,
much pressure on young people to succeed that when they hear you talk about your own failures, it takes a lot of the stress out of them.
there are very few long-lasting pop songs, particularly country songs here in the US, The most popular country songs that are ever written are the ones that are written from an artist's pain, not from their success. And I mean, it goes all the way back to Mozart. The Lacrimosa is the most famous thing that he wrote in the Requiem, not some bright, sunny piece about how great life is. And I think that that's a transferable principle for leaders. I do think it gets back to our earlier conversation. You don't want to be the big puddle of a mess of a leader. So there's a tightrope to walk of how to be authentic or not. The unicorns we studied in writing the book give a lot of great clues, and a whole lot of the book is just them telling us how to do these things, not me. And they continually talk about walking the tightrope, having the wisdom to know what's authentic and what's oversharing. But not sharing and being sort of the bulletproof have it all together leader, that time is not right now.
In the context of your own experiences, can you share a specific instance where you had to demonstrate agility in your career and what lessons you learned from that situation?
Yeah. Well, there are times where I did not show agility and it cost me, and I missed the boat on things. We could spend hours on that. But I'm reminded, I can't believe it's been 5 years since the world fell apart. But 5 years ago, we'd had hockey stick growth every year. And then the pandemic happens, and we serve churches and schools primarily. At the time, that was mainly churches and then schools, and they were all shut down and they weren't hiring. And we help people hire the right people. So, like, we had nothing to do. And I remember reading a paper. It's a really great paper. It might be worth reading now because it doesn't just apply to the pandemic, but it was called Leading Beyond the Blizzard. You can find it if you Google it. Leading Beyond the Blizzard. If you add the word Praxis, Praxis, afterward, you'll find it. It's a little think tank called Praxis that wrote this. And they wrote this paper called Leading Beyond the Blizzard, and they put it out in mid-March of 20. So right when things were starting to unravel. And they said, if you own a small business or you're a leader, you need to decide what kind of storm we're facing. Is this, to borrow from winter, a really bad snowstorm that's going to have us all shut down for a few weeks and then we'll dig out of it and things will be fine? Is this a blizzard that's going to last a long time and maybe a few months? And how are you going to respond to that? And then said, or is this a mini ice age? And those last about 18 months. And they went on with this metaphor effort. So, do you need to prepare your business for 2 weeks of shutdown, 3 months of shutdown, or a year and a half to 2 years of shutdown? And I made the mistake of reading that paper right before I was trying to go to bed. That don't read the paper right before you go to bed. It was, because it was a bad time. But we looked at it, thought about it, and I decided I think we better plan for a mini ice age. And we're a cash driven business. We don't have investors or debt. So, we've been irrationally frugal with some things. So we had some storehouses, but I started to ask some of our smartest clients, how much of a dip in giving do you think you'll see at your church or at your school because of this? And from there, we started to run some very intuitively driven calculus to say, well, what does that mean? And so I went to my COO and said, I have a hunch that if we're going to make it through this, we're going to have to cut 40% of our operating expenses tomorrow. And we don't have like supply chain, we don't have manufactured
It's just
goods,
people.
it's people. And he's smarter business guy than I am. He was Harvard Business School and all. He said, well, I think we're gonna have to cut, but give me the weekend. This is a Friday. Give me the weekend and let me do some math and I'll come back and tell you what I think. So, okay, fine. So we go through the weekend, we get to Monday. He said, I've done the math and, according to my calculations, we need to cut about 39.8% of our overhead. I said, okay, we'll go with your number. But I was intuitive, he was calculus, but it came to the same answer. So we had a really, really hard Friday meeting that week. And we told people it was going to be hard. And whether it's right or wrong, I felt like, let's just do this one time instead of firing a few people each month. For
No, it's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah. Well, again, religion and philosophy degree, so I'm figuring it out as I go. But I said, now listen, the people who are left, honestly, the smart thing for me to do would be to close the business for 2 years and just reopen. Send everybody home. live on savings, and we'll start over when this is done. But here's what we're going to do. And it's crazy, but we got a lot of clients that don't know what they're doing, and we're going to serve them, and we're going to help them figure out how to do the things that they're trying to figure out. We're going to learn some agility, and it means we're not going to do any search work. We probably won't bill anything for anybody, but we're going to serve our clients. And if we die serving, that's a good way to die. So off we went, and I could spend hours talking about it, but one example would be here in the States. The federal government had been talking about helping small businesses with about 8 to 10 weeks of payroll funded by the
Yeah,
government,
I
the
remember.
PPP program, right? So the day before it went to the floor of the Senate, literally the day before, and we'd been studying the bill just for us because we're a small business. But the day before they went to Senate, they decided, okay, we'll include faith-based organizations. And it was like this long of a snippet in an 800-page bill. There were no articles about that. And we were like, oh, wait, every church in America now qualifies for this. Well, compensation for pastors is very different. There are a lot of little nooks and crannies in the tax code. It's just you wouldn't know it if you don't know it. So we said, you know what, we're going to be the expert on this. And we put a Facebook Live out on 4 hours notice. And we used to do webinars, and maybe we'd have 2,500 or 30,000 people show up. We had 24,000 people show up on a Thursday afternoon with very little notice. We did it again the next day. We had 30,000 people show up. Long story short, there were 90,000.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. There were 90,000 faith-based organizations that received government assistance for paychecks. 30,000 of them came directly to us for advice. And I could tell story after story about our finance director figured out how to build a payroll calculator online and put it up for people for free. And we papers and then there's a whole slew of other things we did, but that was all stuff we weren't trained for. And we just said, we're going to step into the moment and help these people and trust that if we get through this, people will remember those who helped them during a hard time. And it has been maybe the best business decision we've made the entirety of our company.
Yeah, I mean, you brought yourself a lot of goodwill and your brand grew exponentially. I mean, my God, 30,000, even when you were telling me 2,500, listening to whatever you were doing, whatever information you were providing is still an enormous number. But 30,000 is just incredible. Congratulations on that.
Now, you know what?
Um,
I can't take credit. It was the right place, the right time. But our team showed the agility to say, I know this isn't in my job description. And we all said, pause on what we normally do. How do we help during a hard time? And it paid off.
what specific strategies do you recommend for individuals who find it challenging to shift their mindset from focusing on problems to actively seeking solutions, especially in high stress environments?
Yeah, I wish I knew a great answer for that. Some people, a great mentor of mine once told me, William, here's the reality. If life is an equation, there's the problem side of the equation and the solution side, and you can live on one side or the other in your mind. Nearly everyone lives on the problem side. And I think that's actually true. If you look at like top news articles, even during our presidential election recently, it was all the clickbait was how the world's going to fall apart, or how this person's awful, or how that person's lying, or it's the negative tends to draw our attention more than the positive. So I think it's an act of the will to say, I refuse to live on the problem side. Doesn't mean ignore problems. Like you need to know if there are problems in your business, but it's frankly just an act of will to say, living on the problem side is never going to get us to the solution side. So how do I focus on the preferred reality? How do I focus on what we can make of this, whether it's a crisis or just a road bump in your business? And I don't know a good formula for that other than, the old Nike line, just do it. But it's better on the solution side, I promise you. And the unicorn
You
in the book,
Go ahead.
they are relentlessly focused on the solution side. Relentlessly. There's a fabulous clip you can look up on YouTube. It's a 2-minute clip. Obama gets stuff done. It's fantastic. And he goes on and on about how he's like, look, I am surrounded by people who are great at naming problems, but that's not who I'm looking for. I'm looking for the person who says, I can take care of that. I'll figure it out. He said, that's why I tell young people, quit worrying about finding the plum job or the plum assignment. Just kill what you're doing right now. Just nail it and be on the solution side. You'll end up with the promotion because it's a pretty rare trait.
Yeah, I tell my students that all the time that when they're doing internships, go and ask your boss to tackle the problems because most people try to avoid it because they're worried about it killing their career or they don't want to have to put in that kind of effort. But if you do that, you rise up the ranks pretty quickly and people want to invest in you.
Well, that's the whole premise behind the book of The Unicorn is these people stand out. These are the people that you can be on a 5-floor elevator ride with them and you go, I really like them. I want to know more about them. I want to date them. I want to hire them. I want to. That magic is these little habits practiced when you're in human to human relationships. And I'm amazed how many schools are buying this book for their seniors that are getting ready to graduate and go have to do internships and do just what you're talking about. Because they're not hard things to practice. They're just incredibly uncommon. And when you practice them, you stand out.
In your experience, how can leaders encourage a culture of collaboration and problem solving among teams, particularly when faced with the resistance or a history of negative dynamics, which you find very often in large organizations?
Yeah, well, a couple of things come to mind. Here's what not to do. Okay. Thinking of one organization we worked with, and there was a guy named Grover. I liked Grover on Sesame Street, so I don't have anything against anybody named Grover, but he was so negative. He made Eeyore look like an optimist, and he was always part of the problem and never part of the solution. And so when a committee was formed to find a new leader for the organization, everybody said, "Well, let's put Grover on it, because if he's always negative, if he's part of finding this person, then he can't complain about the leader once they're here." That's worked about 0 times in my experience. If you have someone who's consistently negative or consistently an anchor, don't put them on a collaborative team. Go give them something to do because it's infectious. It's like leaven in a lump of bread. It just leavens the whole lump. And so do not think the very kind thought that, well, if we take the negative person and put them around the positives and let them in the solution, then they'll get on board. No. The second thing I'd say that I've learned from the unicorns that we interviewed, and it's backed up by Apple and Amazon, is however many people you think you need on the team to find a solution, cut it in half. My mother used to say when we were packing for a trip, lay out everything you want to take on the trip and then put half of it back in the drawer because we're only taking half of it. And what I'm seeing, especially in larger organizations, is that small collaborative teams work. Not autocratic singular leaders, but at Apple, they name a problem. It's like, okay, you three go figure out a solution and bring it back to the larger group to talk about. But when you get 10, 12, 15, it is very hard to get anything done with that many voices in the room. So the two things I would say, avoid putting the negative person on the solution team and avoid making that solution team too big. Just insist that it be small and you'll be more agile. As your company grows, if you succeed, you're going to get bigger, which is going to make you more calcified and harder to turn, almost like the size of boats. You think of Navy boats, the little PT boats can zip around and turn. Aircraft carriers are powerful, but it takes a long time to turn those things around.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying turning around an aircraft carrier in a bathtub. In your experience, how can leaders effectively cultivate a culture of anticipation within their teams, especially in fast-paced or rapidly changing environments?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we noticed with the unicorns that they're very good at anticipating. And maybe if you play billiards or pool, whatever you would call it, whatever
Yep.
country you're in, you know, I know that I'm going to end up losing when I'm playing somebody who's looking at a place on the table that has nothing to do with the shot they're getting ready to take. They're getting ready to shoot it in the corner pocket, but they're looking back over here at the other corner and the side. That's because they're planning the next 3 shots. They're picking their shot based on what they want the next 3 shots to look like. And that is not hard to shift into, but it's incredibly uncommon. It's what makes Tiger Woods such a good golfer. He thinks about where the pin is when he's on the tee box 600 yards away because he wants to put the first shot here so the second can be there. So how do you encourage that in your team? Here's a great hack, a question that I think is pretty cool to ask. Hey, Mark, if we doubled tomorrow, what would we need to have in place to not just collapse as a business? If we doubled tomorrow, what would we need? It frees people up from oh, we're getting ready to change. It's an absurd question. We ask it all the time here. I know exactly what we need to do, but it moves me to thinking past the how do I get through this week? How do I get this month's sales numbers up to, oh my gosh, what if we were twice as big? What if we were three times as big? There's here in the States, there's a NFL football, right? Not football like everybody in the rest
Yeah.
of the world says, but the Minnesota Vikings had an incredible regular season. They just got knocked out. But one of the things that made them was their defense. They went from having very few turnovers that they caused, where you cause the other team to lose the ball, to being the most turnovers of any defense in the league. So they were if you had the ball and you were playing the Vikings, you're probably going to turn it over. Well, how'd they do that? Fantastic story. The people on the defense were, a lot of them like to dance and do like TikTok dances and those things that are popular. And they're goofing off, spending all this time. And the coach was trying to get them to quit goofing off. And finally he said, you know what? Why don't y'all get that dance perfect? And when we get the turnover, you do that celebration dance in front of all the cameras. Well, now
Good
there's
incentive.
Minnesota.
Good
Yeah. Yeah.
incentive.
Oh, if you go on social and look up Minnesota Vikings dance, it's hilarious. But think about the psychology there. Once we get the turnover, not if, but once we get the turnover, we're going to do our dance. And they work all week on their dance, and all of a sudden it's like, we got to get the turn. Once we get the turnover, instead of thinking, I wonder if we'll get a turnover, it creates anticipation. And it creates a positive mindset that's more toward the solution. And I think it's a fabulous thing. I don't know how you translate that into your businesses for those of you listening today, but how can you talk about once we hit the all-time sales record, we're going to do this and it's going to be great. Let's start getting ready for it. So that there's a culture of anticipation rather than a culture of fear and wondering if things are going to progress.
Question from the audience. You mentioned there's a list of habits that unicorns have. Out of all of them, apart from to have the confidence to say no, which ones are more important than others?
Such a good question. I think it depends on what you do with your job. What do I mean when I say that? Speed and agility, probably not the best things to have in your compliance officer, right? If you're, I mean, we're known for creativity in Houston. We built the Astrodome. We've got the best cancer center in the world. We're solving all kinds of innovation in healthcare. And we tried innovation in accounting, and it was called Enron. Like you don't, there's some jobs that you don't want that habit as much. There are other jobs, salespeople. Well, responsiveness is everything. So I think you have to look at the 12 and you have to say, what does my job require? And how do I get better at those things? We actually built a software, like a personality index to show you where you go to vanderindex.com and you can find out what are your top three and your bottom three and how do I figure out what that means about where I should work and how I apply it in my job. So it's a great question. I wish I had a singular answer. I don't. I'll tell you the one that's most interesting is the habit called self-awareness. Because it turns out self-awareness, maybe if these 12 habits were an archway, self-awareness might be the keystone. If you have that, the others come much easier. And the reality is very few people have self-awareness. You say, oh, I have self-awareness. Well, let me ask you this. Does anyone remember, Mark, do you remember the first time you heard your voice recorded?
Ugh.
It's terrible.
Yeah,
That's
still.
the universal response I get. It's like, and I remember when I heard it, I was like, who's that? He's got a terrible voice. This is awful. I'm glad I don't sound like him. Guess what? That is the very natural human blind spot called self-awareness. And interestingly, we asked all 30,000 unicorns, we surveyed them all and said, why don't you force rank these 12 habits and tell me what you think you're good at and worst at? And the results were all over the board. But last place for nearly every unicorn was, I really got to work on self-awareness. When the reality is they're better than normal. We surveyed 250,000 normal people and asked them, how are you at self-awareness? 91% of them said they're above average. It's the hardest one to get. We all think we're good at it. The people who are good at it think they need to do more work on it. That would be one that I am trying to work on the hardest.
I wonder if there are CEOs who are successful that really don't care about self-awareness.
I think there are a lot of them. A lot
Yeah.
of them that are now former CEOs.
Former CEOs. So I think some of them are president. Um, so our last question here is, in what specific ways do you recommend individuals cultivate a mindset of preparedness, especially in environments characterized by constant change and uncertainty, similar to what we've experienced during the pandemic? And we're seeing that now in the changeover for administrations and what's going on in Russia and what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, preparedness means doing everything you can to be ready. But let me tell you what I screwed up when I thought about leadership vision for so many years. I thought I had to have vision for 10 years from now, 5 years from now, what's 3 years from now look like. That's not vision, that's not preparedness. Preparedness is being a little bit more ready than everybody else. And it's usually just a half a step. It's not, and that I learned that in the pandemic. We didn't know how it was going to go, but we were able to read things and say, let's get ahead of this just a half step before everybody else. And I didn't even know there's sorry to keep quoting Hebrew scriptures, but David wrote one time, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And I thought that meant if you read, the scriptures, you get a flashlight that lets you see into the future. That's not what he was talking about. He was talking about literally little lanterns that people would wear on the end of their shoes at night that would give them enough light for the next step. So I think if you want to, talk about preparedness, on the one hand, we have more information available to, it's the best time to be curious in world history. You can find out a lot and get prepared. On the other hand, a lot we don't know. So rather than what I'm trying to do is rather than focus on what do things look like 5 years from now is what did things look like now and how do I get half a step ahead of the trend? And that's freed me up a lot. So I don't know if that's helpful to others, but it's what I'm working on.
I have to say, this hour went way too fast. And William, I really enjoyed the book and I enjoyed the conversation. And I'm hoping you'll have more books in you for the future.
Thank you very much, Mark. Got one coming out in October. Just got to get it finished.
Well, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your week. William, thank you for coming, especially since you're traveling tomorrow. I hope you have a safe trip.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, and thank you all for listening.
Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.